When my mom's old boss laughed at us in the food stamp line, I never imagined that one day he'd make headlines, and that the world's newest billionaire would secretly carry our last name. What I discovered next changed everything we thought we knew about family, betrayal, and revenge. The news hit like a thunderbolt. There, splashed across the front page of Forbes magazine, was a face that looked so hauntingly familiar. Beneath it, in bold letters, the headline read, "The world's most mysterious billionaire revealed. Meet Thomas Walker, the genius who rose from obscurity." My heart pounded as I stared at the name below his photo, Thomas Walker. Same nose, same eyes, same crooked smile. And right there, in smaller text beneath the headline, it said something that made me drop the magazine from my trembling hands. Walker was adopted at birth, his biological family remains unknown. The name Walker wasn't just familiar because of the man in the photo. It was familiar because it was ours. Our last name. Mom's maiden name before she changed it to protect herself. And suddenly, I remembered every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every humiliating afternoon we stood in that food stamp line, being judged by the very people who once worked for Mom's old boss, the same man whose son had just been named a billionaire. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part was when we found out who Thomas Walker really was. And what Mom had done to keep the truth buried for 30 years. To understand what happened that day, you need to know where it all began, long before the magazine cover, long before the world called him a billionaire, and long before my family's laughter turned into tears. It all started in a small, cracked apartment building on Maple Street, where the paint peeled from the walls and the neighbors argued louder than the TV. That's where Mom, my sister Emma, and I lived after Dad walked out. We didn't have much, just each other, a few old clothes, and a radio that worked only if you smacked it on the side. Mom worked 2 jobs back then. In the mornings, she cleaned houses. At night, she worked as a cashier in a grocery store. I remember how her hands were always dry and cracked from scrubbing floors and washing dishes. She never complained, though. She just smiled and said, "Hard work doesn't break you, it builds you." But no matter how hard she worked, we were always short on rent. So, every month, we stood in the food stamp line at the county center. That line was long, painfully long, filled with people trying to hide their shame. Some wore sunglasses even indoors. Others avoided eye contact. But not us. We laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Mom said if you could still laugh in that line, you hadn't lost everything yet. Except one day, we weren't the only ones laughing. A group of people at the end of the line, a man and 2 teenage boys, were whispering and chuckling. One of them pointed at us. "Look at them," one of the boys snickered. "Maybe next time, they'll save up enough for a sandwich instead of lipstick." The man with them, a tall guy with slick gray hair and a suit too fancy for a place like that, gave a small laugh too. His eyes met Mom's for a moment, and something cold passed between them. Mom froze. I'd never seen her face go so pale. She didn't say a word. She just turned around, grabbed our hands, and led us out of the line. That night, she cried quietly in her room. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. When I asked Emma where she went, she whispered, she said she had something to settle. We didn't know what that meant then. But we would. Days later, I saw that same man again, the one from the food stamp line. He was standing outside our apartment building, talking to Mom. His voice was sharp, like broken glass. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said. Mom's hands were shaking. "You owe me the truth, Richard. You owe me." He laughed, that same cruel laugh from before. "You gave that up a long time ago, Sarah. You made your choice." Then he walked away. Mom just stood there, trembling. When I asked her who he was, she said, "An old mistake." That night, she took out a small, worn-out box from her closet. Inside it were old photos, black and white, of her in a nurse's uniform. There was one photo of her standing beside a man in a hospital hallway. His name tag read Dr. Richard Walker. The same man who laughed at us in the food stamp line. Mom burned that photo in the sink. From that day on, she changed. She started saving every penny, working extra shifts, and taking night classes. She stopped talking about the past, and every time Emma or I brought it up, she said, "Some things are better buried." Years passed. Emma went to college. I started working at a small repair shop. Life was still hard, but we managed. Until one morning, everything changed again. Mom fainted at work. The doctor said it was exhaustion, that she'd been overworking herself for years. I remember holding her hand in the hospital room as she whispered, "Don't worry, baby. I'm not done yet." But when she came home, she started acting strange. She'd stare at her phone for hours, scrolling through news articles. She'd mutter names under her breath, Richard, Thomas, and once, I even caught her crying over an old envelope with the logo of Walker Pharmaceuticals printed on it. Then came that day, that cursed day, when Forbes revealed the world's newest billionaire, Thomas Walker, the self-made genius behind a new medical tech company. And when we saw his face, everything we thought we knew about our family shattered. Because Thomas wasn't just a random man on a magazine cover. He was the boy Mom used to show us in that burnt photograph, the one she'd once called, "My Little Miracle." The boy she said she lost in a hospital fire 30 years ago. And now, the world was calling him the most mysterious billionaire alive. But what no one knew, not the reporters, not the investors, not even Thomas himself, was that he had our last name. And that my mother had a secret that could destroy everything he'd built. That night, as rain slammed against the windows, Mom called us into the living room. She was holding the magazine in one hand and an old birth certificate in the other. Her voice trembled. "There's something I have to tell you," she said. Emma and I leaned forward, our hearts racing. Mom looked at us with tears streaming down her face. "Thomas Walker is your brother." The room fell silent. And before we could even speak, there was a knock on the door. A firm, cold knock. When Mom opened it, a man in a dark suit stood outside. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter, and a single line that changed everything. "We know what you did, Sarah. It's time to talk." Mom's face turned white as snow. And that was the night everything truly began to unravel. The letter fell from Mom's hand and drifted slowly to the floor. No one spoke. The rain outside beat harder against the windows, like it was warning us to stay silent. Emma picked up the letter, her hands shaking. "Mom, what is this?" she whispered. But Mom didn't answer. She just sank into the couch, clutching her chest like the air had suddenly become too heavy to breathe. I picked up the envelope. It was plain white, with no return address. Just a black seal stamped with a strange symbol, a circle with a cross through it. I'd never seen anything like it before. Inside, there was another sheet of paper. Typed, clean, and cold, "We know Thomas Walker's true identity. If you wish to keep your past buried, meet us at the old Willow Creek Hospital tomorrow night. Alone." The letter wasn't signed. Mom closed her eyes and whispered, "It's happening again." "Mom," I said, kneeling in front of her, "you need to tell us what's going on. Who are these people? What do they mean by, keep your past buried?" She looked at us, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes, the kind that comes from secrets too heavy to carry anymore. "You have to understand," she said softly, "I did what I had to do. I didn't want this life for any of you." "What life?" Emma asked. "We barely had one, Mom. We lived paycheck to paycheck, we stood in food stamp lines, we got laughed at, and now you're telling us there's a billionaire out there who's our brother?" Mom's lips trembled. "He wasn't supposed to survive." The words hit us like a punch. Emma blinked. "What do you mean, wasn't supposed to survive?" Mom looked away. "There was a fire in the maternity wing at Willow Creek 30 years ago. That's what I told everyone, that Thomas died that night. But it wasn't true. I could barely breathe." "Then what is the truth?" She stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the rain. Her voice was low, heavy. "Your brother was taken from me, by Dr. Richard Walker." "The man from the food stamp line?" I asked. She nodded. "He was my boss at the hospital. I was young then, just a nurse trying to make ends meet. He promised me a better life. He said he loved me." She paused, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. "But when I got pregnant, everything changed. He told me he couldn't be seen with a nurse. He said he'd take care of the baby, just until I got my life together." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But he never gave him back." Emma covered her mouth. "So you're saying, he took Thomas?" Mom nodded again. "He told me the baby died in the fire. But I knew something wasn't right. I searched for years. Every door I knocked on got slammed in my face. Every record I requested mysteriously vanished. And now, I said, that baby, he's Thomas Walker. The billionaire. Mom turned toward us, her face pale as paper. Yes. And now someone knows the truth. That's why they want me to go back there. To the place where it all started. That night, none of us slept. Mom sat at the kitchen table, staring at that letter like it was alive. Emma tried to convince her not to go. It's dangerous, Mom. What if it's a trap? It probably is, I said. Whoever sent that letter knows too much. If they wanted to talk, they could have called. Why meet in an abandoned hospital? Mom shook her head. Because that's where all the records are, or were. Maybe they found something. Then we'll go with you, I said. No, she said sharply. They said alone. I can't risk you two getting involved. Emma slammed her fist on the table. We're already involved. Do you even hear yourself? You've been hiding this from us our entire lives. Mom didn't answer. She just stared at the letter again, like she was waiting for it to start talking. Finally, she said quietly, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll find Thomas. He deserves to know who he really is. Her voice broke. Tell him I never stopped looking. The next night came faster than any of us wanted. The three of us drove through the storm in silence, the wipers fighting against sheets of rain. The old Willow Creek Hospital had been abandoned for years, boarded up windows, broken lights, and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. Mom parked a few blocks away and turned off the headlights. This is where I go alone, she said, gripping the steering wheel. I could feel my chest tighten. Mom, please. She gave me a faint smile. You're both strong. I raised you to be. But there are things in that hospital I can't let follow you. Before we could argue, she opened the door and stepped into the rain. We watched her walk toward the dark building, her coat whipping in the wind. Emma's voice trembled. We can't just let her go in there alone. I looked at the old hospital. The windows were black holes. The front doors creaked open on their own. Every instinct told me to stay in the car, but something stronger told me to follow. Stay here, I told Emma. Like hell I will, she whispered. We waited a few minutes, then crept out and followed Mom through a side entrance. The air inside was damp and smelled like rust and mold. Water dripped from the ceiling. The echo of our footsteps sounded too loud. Mom? I whispered. No answer. We found the main hallway and followed it toward the old maternity wing. The flickering light from a broken exit sign barely lit the path. Then we heard voices. Mom's voice, low, shaking, and a man's voice, calm and steady. I told you to come alone, Sarah, the man said. I did, Mom replied. What do you want from me? To finish what should have been finished years ago. I peered around the corner. A man in a dark coat stood a few feet from Mom. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, but I recognized his voice instantly. It was Richard Walker, the man from the food stamp line. The man who took my brother. He stepped closer to her. You should have stayed quiet. Now the whole world is asking questions. I don't care about the world. Mom shouted. I just want my son. Richard's smile was cold. He's not your son anymore. He's mine. And then I saw it, the glint of something in his hand. A syringe. He lunged forward. Mom, I screamed, rushing from behind the wall. Richard turned just in time to see me charging toward him. The syringe slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Mom gasped and stumbled backward. Run, she yelled. Emma appeared behind me, her phone raised, filming. We've got you, you creep, she shouted. Richard's eyes went wide. Then he bolted through the emergency exit, disappearing into the rain. Mom collapsed to the ground, shaking. I rushed to her side. Are you okay? I asked. She nodded weakly. I didn't think he'd really come. What was in that syringe? Emma whispered. Mom looked at the shattered glass, her voice trembling. Something to make me disappear. Just like before. We didn't wait another second. We helped Mom to her feet and ran back to the car. As we drove away, Emma pulled up the recording on her phone. We got him on video, she said. His face, his voice, everything. Mom stared at the screen, tears streaming down her cheeks. He'll come for us now, she whispered. He won't stop until he's buried the truth again. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Then we won't stop either. But as we turned onto the highway, headlights suddenly flashed behind us, blinding, too close. A black SUV. It was following us. Mom's voice broke. He's not alone. And before we could react, the SUV rammed into our car with a deafening crash. The sound was deafening. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and Mom's scream pierced through the roar of the storm. The car spun out of control. I yanked the steering wheel, trying to fight the skid, but the wet road made it useless. We hit the guardrail hard, once, twice, before slamming to a stop on the shoulder. Steam hissed from the hood. "Emma, Mom," I shouted, blinking through the smoke. "I'm okay," Emma coughed, clutching her arm. "Just bruised." But Mom wasn't answering. I turned and saw her slumped against the seat, her forehead bleeding. My heart dropped. "Mom, Mom, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, just for a second. "Drive, keep going," she whispered weakly. Behind us, the SUV's headlights grew brighter. The engine revved, it was coming again. "Hold on," I shouted. I slammed the gear into drive and floored the gas. The car groaned, tires squealing, but it lurched forward just in time as the SUV smashed into the spot we'd just been. We sped down the highway, rain hammering the windshield, the SUV close behind. Emma looked back, terror in her eyes. "They're trying to kill us." "No," I said through gritted teeth, "they're trying to kill her." Mom groaned softly, barely conscious. "They can't know where it is." "Where what is?" I asked. She tried to speak, but her voice faded. I took a sharp turn off the highway, down a dirt road that led into the woods. The SUV followed for a few seconds, then its headlights vanished. I pulled over behind a cluster of trees and turned off the engine. We sat in total darkness, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then Emma whispered, "We need to get her to a hospital." Mom stirred. "No hospital," she said faintly. "They'll find me there." "Mom, you're bleeding," I said. She grabbed my wrist weakly. "Listen to me, both of you. Everything depends on what's in that box." "What box?" Emma asked. Mom's eyes opened wide, full of fear. "The one I buried, behind the old house. Maple Street. Under the apple tree. You'll find the truth there." She winced in pain, gripping her side. "He took everything from me once. He won't again. You have to find Thomas before they do." Then she passed out. We made it to an abandoned cabin at the edge of the woods and stayed there till morning. I wrapped Mom's head with an old towel and tried to keep her warm. Emma kept pacing, her phone clutched tightly. "She's not going to make it if we don't get help," she whispered. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "But we can't risk calling 911. If Richard Walker has that much power, the moment her name hits any record, he'll know exactly where we are." Emma rubbed her face. "Then what do we do?" I looked at the car keys, then at Mom. "We go back to Maple Street." The old house still stood, barely. Its roof sagged, the porch creaked, and the garden we once played in was now wild and overgrown. The apple tree was still there, though, its branches twisted and gray, but strong. Emma and I dug under it with our bare hands, dirt mixing with tears and rain. My fingers hit something solid, a rusted metal box. We pulled it out. The lock had long since corroded, so I pried it open with a rock. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a single flash drive. The photos were of Mom in her nurse's uniform, holding a baby with the same blue eyes as mine. On the back, in faded ink, she'd written, "Thomas Walker, born May 3, 1995. Emma gasped. She was telling the truth. There were also documents, birth certificates, medical records, and one that made my stomach twist. It was a hospital transfer form, signed by Dr. Richard Walker, approving the relocation of infant T. Walker for adoption purposes. Emma held up the flash drive. "We need to see what's on this." But just then, a car door slammed outside. We froze. Someone was here. I peeked through the window. A black SUV sat parked at the curb. My heart stopped. "They found us." Emma's voice cracked. "What do we do?" I looked at the flash drive, then at the back door. "We run." We grabbed the box and bolted through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the alley. Footsteps thundered behind us. "Stop," a man shouted. We didn't. We ran through puddles and broken fences until we reached the old railway tracks. The rain had started again, heavy and loud. Emma tripped and fell, the box sliding out of her hands. The flash drive tumbled onto the tracks. I reached down to grab it, but a hand shot out of the dark and grabbed my wrist. It was him, Richard Walker. His face was pale and wet, his eyes sharp like knives. "You shouldn't have come back here," he hissed. Emma screamed, hitting him with the box. He staggered back, and I grabbed the flash drive. We ran again, through the woods, until my lungs burned. When we finally stopped, we were soaked, shaking, and breathless. Emma looked at me. "We can't keep running forever." "I know," I said. "But now we have proof." She nodded toward the flash drive. "Then we find a computer and see what Mom was trying to protect." We found an old library on the edge of town, one of the few places still open that early. We went inside, dripping wet, and sat at a dusty computer in the corner. Emma plugged in the flash drive. There was only one file, will_not_die.mp4. She clicked it. The video opened with static. Then Mom appeared on the screen, younger, maybe by 20 years. Her eyes were red from crying. "My name is Sarah Walker," she said. "If you're watching this, it means Richard found me again. And it means the truth must come out." She took a deep breath. "I was a nurse at Willow Creek Hospital. I fell in love with a doctor, Richard Walker. He promised me the world. When I became pregnant, he said he'd take care of us. But after I gave birth, he took my baby and told me he died in the fire. I believed him until I saw the adoption papers." Mom reached off camera and held up a document, the same one we found in the box. She continued, "I tried to expose him. But he was powerful, connected. He destroyed my records, fired me, ruined my life. I changed my name and disappeared. But I never stopped searching for Thomas." Her voice broke. "If the world ever learns who Thomas truly is, Richard will lose everything. And he knows it." The video ended with her final words, "If I can't stop him, my children will." The screen went black. Emma covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She knew this day would come. Before I could respond, I noticed something. The reflection in the dark computer screen behind us. A man standing at the door. Watching us. "Richard." He smiled slowly. "Touching story," he said, his voice echoing through the quiet library. "But I can't let you finish it." Emma screamed as he reached into his coat. I grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a shelf. "Run," I shouted. But before we could move, the library lights flickered, and the front doors burst open. 2 men in black suits rushed in, flashing badges. "Federal agents." "Drop it," one of them shouted. Richard froze. For a split second, the smug look on his face vanished, replaced by panic. The agents swarmed him, pulling him to the ground. "You're under arrest for identity fraud, child abduction, and obstruction of justice," one said, cuffing him. As they dragged him out, he turned to us, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." Outside, the rain finally stopped. Emma and I sat on the library steps, the flash drive still in her hand. "Do you think Mom knew they'd come?" she asked quietly. "I think she was counting on it," I said. "That's why she made the video. It was her insurance." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was the hospital. Mom had woken up. We drove there as the first light of morning broke through the clouds. When we walked into her room, she smiled weakly, her eyes full of relief. "You found it," she whispered. "We did," I said, holding her hand. "And he's been arrested." "It's over, Mom." But she shook her head. "No, it's not over yet. There's something you still don't know." Her voice faltered. Emma leaned closer. "What is it, Mom?" Mom's lips trembled as she whispered, "Thomas, he doesn't know who Richard really is. And when he finds out, he'll come looking for me." The monitor beside her beeped faster. We both stared at her in shock. "What do you mean?" I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because Richard isn't just his adoptive father." She paused, her voice shaking. "He's his real father too." The room went completely silent after Mom said those words. Even the steady beep of the hospital monitor seemed to fade into the distance. Emma and I just stood there, staring at her, trying to understand what she had just said. Finally, I managed to whisper, "What do you mean, he's his real father too?" Mom took a trembling breath, her eyes glistening with tears. "When I first met Richard, I thought he was the kindest man alive. I was young, stupid, and in love. He told me he was divorced, that he was lonely. I believed him." She paused, staring at the ceiling as if she could still see the past there. "When I got pregnant, he changed. He became cold, distant. He told me that if anyone found out, his career would be over. I thought he was just scared, but then I found out he was already married. To a woman from one of the richest families in the state. She swallowed hard. He told me he'd take care of the baby until he could fix things. I didn't know he meant taking him away forever. Emma covered her mouth, whispering, so Thomas was never adopted, he was kept by Richard? Mom nodded weakly. He raised him as his son. Changed his birth record. Changed everything. Thomas grew up thinking he was a miracle baby, rescued from a fire, destined for greatness. And I was erased. Tears slid down her cheeks. That's why he built Walker Pharmaceuticals. He used my research, my work, my ideas. Every formula I ever created when I was a nurse in his lab. That company was supposed to be ours. The pain in her voice made my chest ache. So Thomas became the billionaire, I said quietly, and you were left with nothing. Mom gave a weak laugh, one that sounded more like heartbreak. Nothing but guilt. I tried to move on, to raise you both, to forget him, but every time I looked at the mirror, I saw Thomas's face in yours. Emma took her hand gently. You did what you could, Mom. He was the monster, not you. But Mom didn't seem to hear her. She turned her gaze toward the window, where the morning sun was beginning to rise. You have to tell him the truth, she said. Thomas deserves to know where he really came from. But be careful, he's been raised on lies. He won't believe you easily. I nodded slowly. We'll find him. Mom squeezed my hand, a faint smile touching her lips. Then maybe I can finally rest. 2 weeks later, after Mom was discharged, the story exploded across the internet. Forbes billionaire Thomas Walker's true identity exposed. News anchors called it the greatest secret in corporate history. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Some called Mom a hero, others called her a liar. But one thing was certain, the world knew now. Thomas Walker's name was everywhere. We watched him on TV the next day, sitting stiffly in a black suit, answering questions in a calm, controlled tone. I've learned that the man who raised me wasn't my biological father, he said. The woman who claims to be my mother. I don't know yet what to believe. His eyes were cold, distant. Emma turned off the TV. He doesn't believe her. I sighed. He will. The truth always wins, eventually. But part of me wasn't so sure. A month passed. Mom tried to stay strong, but the stress of the media storm took its toll. She barely slept, and every time the phone rang, she jumped. Then, one evening, there was a knock at the door. Mom looked at me nervously. Don't answer it, she whispered. But something in her eyes, a mix of fear and hope, made me open the door anyway. A man stood there, tall, neatly dressed, the same blue eyes as mine. Thomas. He didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at Mom, really looked at her, and his expression softened. Sarah Walker, he said quietly. I saw the proof. Mom's lips trembled. Then you know. He nodded. I know he lied to me. I know you're my mother. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped closer. I never stopped looking for you, Thomas. Not for one day. He hesitated, then pulled her into a hug. It was the first time in 30 years that she held her lost son again. For a few moments, it felt like the world had finally righted itself. But peace never lasts long when secrets run deep. Because Thomas wasn't just there to reunite. He had something else on his mind. When he pulled back, his eyes were hard again. Mom, he said softly, I need to ask you something. She nodded. Anything. He took a deep breath. Richard left behind files, private ones. They show a research formula that matches yours. The one that made the company billions. If I turn it in, everything he built collapses. But it also means I lose everything too. The board, the investors, they'll destroy me. Mom stared at him. So what are you saying? Thomas looked down. I'm saying I need to know, do I let his empire burn? Or keep it alive under my name? The question hung heavy in the air. Emma stepped forward. You can't build your life on his lies, Thomas. You have to make it right. But Mom said nothing. She just looked at her son, the boy she'd lost and the man he'd become. After a long silence, she said softly, I don't care about the company. I only care about your soul. Don't let him live through you. Thomas nodded slowly, his jaw tight. Then I'll do it. I'll burn it all down. 3 months later, Forbes ran another headline. Thomas Walker resigns, donates entire fortune to victims of corporate abuse. The world called it redemption. Some called it revenge. But for us, it was closure. Thomas visited often after that. He and Mom spent hours talking, about everything they'd missed, about forgiveness, about starting over. One night, as the three of us sat together watching the sunset, he said quietly, "You know, all those years I laughed at people standing in food stamp lines, I thought I was above them. I thought wealth made me better. But now I know, I was standing in the wrong line all along." Mom smiled, her eyes shining. Life has a way of humbling us when we least expect it. He nodded. "You were right, Mom. What goes around, always comes around." The three of us laughed softly as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first real peace our family had known in decades. And though the past could never be erased, that evening felt like the beginning of something new. A story that started with loss, and ended with redemption. Because in the end, justice had been served, not through hate or money, but through truth. And truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. If this story taught you that karma never forgets and truth always finds its way home, then hit that like button, drop a comment with "Justice served," and subscribe for more stories that prove what goes around always comes around.